find the introduction sheet. Here it is. Next speaker is probably the most politically active of anyone here in the room. Let me qualify that. The most successfully politically active of anyone in the room. And that's important. And it's, I'm going to read it. We're going to play the Will Abrams tape a little bit later when we have an opportunity. I know we're going to have it. Pierre, Michel St. Pierre, is the leader of the highly successful Ron Paul and Liberty movements in North Washington State. The title of her talk is Turning Talk into Political Action. Talk by itself. You need to be able to turn it into political action. And she knows how to do that. And those of you who were in here for my opening remarks heard me say that we always like to see any materials that are distributed here, and they should be approved, because we do not assemble this group as a target for nonsense. And the stuff is out there. You've all seen it on the internet, the nonsense. However, anything from the Ron Paul group is always welcome, always allowed. We know he's a good person doing what he thinks is the right thing. There's no BS, there's no disinformation. And Michelle works very closely with them. And we do have some different views from Ron Paul regarding how to solve the problem, but not that different. Really not that different. And we've known for years of the possibility of getting Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich together. And we've observed efforts to stop that. Our Portland experience, Bob, that you could tell people about. In fact, that's one of the things that clued us into the importance of a potential alliance between the two of them. Now, Michelle has, in turning political talk into political action, she's run into all this stuff. I think maybe even more than I have. But once you get involved, you do see it. If you're not really involved, there's a chance you could just miss it. Okay. Auditing the Fed, what happened, where we go now? Washington State's Democratic and Republican state conventions both passed resolutions to audit the Fed. This is why. Mobilizing a coalition, grassroots army to pass monetary reform legislation. How it's getting done in Washington State and how to cookie cutter that around the country. Finding and educating candidates on monetary reform, why it's a key campaign issue, which can lead to them winning their elections. This is important. November elections, who's on our side? How do we reach them? Getting a bill passed when you don't have the majority. We never thought we needed a majority, by the way. I think we only need, I used to think 5%. I think we could, if we had 2%, it's a huge, huge potential for success. There are, how party politics works, how to take over. There are no solutions without a political solution. You have your microphone? Wonderful.
I do.
Please welcome Michel St. Pierre.
Hi, it's great to see everybody here. There are two ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by the sword, the other is by debt. Would you say that our nation is enslaved by debt right now? The other quote is self-explanatory. I'm a Congressional District 2 coordinator for Ron Paul's Campaign for Liberty, and I organize in 5 counties. and I'm also a volunteer for his campaign, working on his presidential campaign. I'm a writer, and I give lectures on the political system and the monetary system for political groups. I've been involved with grassroots organizing and campaigns for the last 23 years. I'm involved now in the Republican Party, which I came to because I wanted to support Ron Paul. I teach Robert's Rules of Order and Parliamentary Procedure as a means for citizens to participate in Republican Party politics or in Democratic Party politics. Most meetings and all conventions and organizational meetings use Robert's Rules. Congress and state legislating bodies also use a derivative of this basic parliamentary procedure. It is the operating system for government, and I want to bring it to the grassroots. I think it should be taught in all the schools so that we, the people, can participate in our government. Most of my slides are for comic relief, which you really need when you get involved in the political process. There's our friends, the robber baron banksters. Everything that I do in politics is to focus on the primary issue of our times, which is monetary reform. The reason that I have this focus is that we have allowed a criminal banking syndicate to take over our government. And through welfare on the left and warfare on the right, they have managed to get us into unpayable debt servitude to our friends here, the robber baron banksters, through their control of our currency. Stephen said, and I'll say it again, the truth is, without a political solution, there is no solution. But getting a solution through the entrenched political establishment is very difficult. Getting candidates elected who understand the monetary issue is not easy. Educating sitting legislators is also another challenge. But I want to take a look at the political party system and how it's structured, and then how it relates to us passing monetary reform. There's a whole political party process that happens. It's not covered in the media. It's operating almost entirely under the radar. Little is known about this process by the general public, and political parties want to keep it that way because it is how they exercise top-down leadership and keep the reins of power from the grassroots in the hands of a few who are beholden to the interests of banking, Wall Street, mega corporations, and the military-industrial complex. And this election will be about the economy, and a lot of our economy is a war economy, and so we will address that too. The players in the political parties are largely unknown, and yet they control a very important process by which you get two candidates on the ballot. Its workings are partially controlled by state and federal law and partially controlled by internal rules. It is difficult to find out what those internal rules are, as they are often not written and frequently are changed and manipulated by the parties for political expediency and to keep the status quo in power. I'm going to give you my perspective from the Republican side, but the Democratic Party system operates in much the same way. And in Campaign for Liberty is a bipartisan group. We have Democrats and Republicans in Campaign for Liberty, and so we teach the political system to everyone that wants to learn about it. For most people, the political process begins with seeing two people to vote for on their ballot. By this time, it's too late to affect real change. I hear people complain all the time that they are tired of having to vote for Dumb and Dumber. But how did they get on the ballot? I mean, if you are going to have self-government, then you have to insert yourself into the system. If you want your principles represented in government, then get involved. Our system was designed as a grassroots participation system. We need to use the toolbox the Founding Fathers gave us. Our system was designed to give we the people the power to control our government. Our system is the envy in the world in that regards. But it only works if the grassroots, if the people actually get involved. So I encourage people to get involved in their political parties. How many people here actually are involved in your political party process? Good. Great. That's great. I'm going to talk about how you can get involved, and it's relatively easy. Turn off your TV. Politics is not a spectator sport. It is a participatory sport, and yelling at your TV does not qualify as political participation. Politics is entertaining. It is better than any sitcom, soap opera, nighttime drama, or movie that you will ever see, because it is real and is having a real effect on all of our lives. The plus side of it is it can be a lot of fun when you get to know the players involved, toss out the bad guys, and reward the good guys. In order to combat Tammany Hall-style corruption, and you probably all know a little bit about Tammany Hall in New York and how the party bosses ran the parties and made political payoffs and patronage, and they elected their candidates, which were well-heeled people that were high up in business and sometimes mafioso types. To combat that, about 100 years ago, laws were made across the states to elect precinct committee officers, sometimes called precinct captains, or in different places they have other names for them. And a precinct is the smallest unit, basically might have between 500 to 2,500 voters in a precinct in your county. And that's the smallest unit, political unit. And so every 4 years, elections get held in each precinct. And you get to vote for a party representative in your precinct to one of the two major parties. And so if you want to be on the ground level on getting involved in a party, you can run for that election as a PCO. You can go down to your auditors or your township or your county and just sign up to be in that election. And that way you can actually become a voting member of a political party, Democrat or Republican. So that basic unit, now you have an incredible amount of power. You think, oh, well, I just represent my little precinct, but you have a lot of power because the PCOs, the precinct committee officers or captains, they're the ones that vote in the leadership for the major parties, Republican and Democrat. These people have a lot of power to put good people in office or to return the same old hacks again and again. A lot of times, many of these slots are not filled. In my county, we have about 300 slots, PCO slots filled, and yet there's 750 available. And so all those precincts are left without representation, and also think of the Army. If you had people fill those slots, they'd take over the party in our county if they filled those slots. And across the state, it works the same way. Because then when you're a PCO, you go and you vote in your county leadership. And then that county leadership votes who the state leadership is. The state leadership votes for the national leadership of the Republican Party. So if you look at all of the grassroots efforts that go on that are in various organizations, they can be very ineffectual. But if you came in, you could take over either one of the major parties very easily with very few people. This is when we were talking about you don't need a majority, you just need a tireless minority to get in there and work in the party system. And you could change the entire direction of one of the major political parties or both of them. And we actually work to change both of them for the better. We believe we need to get honest people in there. It's not even so much whether we agree with them exactly politically. It's that honest, decent, ordinary people need to be in government. That we need to see people that actually care about the people around them, their neighbors, their country, rather than people that are doing it for political gain or monetary gain. That was Boss Tweed. Nice guy, huh? Looks her. The presidential election is a very complicated process, actually, in it, and there's a lot of different ins and outs in each state. So whatever state you're in, you'll probably have to study your state, but I can talk in general about it. Presidential elections, they're controlled by the major two parties, and it goes through a party process. So when I encourage people to get involved in these parties, it's because right now they have a stranglehold on us. There's two parties, and they really control almost all of the candidates that we see on the ballot. I know that Jules with the Green Party, I worked with the Libertarian Party, and it is so difficult to gain any ground with a third party that we felt that it was a better thing to try and get into one of the major parties and try and change that, because most people are just programmed through the media and just through the fact that it's been there for so long, the system, and they've made laws to exclude third parties. Most people just go for the R&D. They don't look at anything else. In a presidential election, delegates are chosen through the party system. In caucus states, and my state, Washington, is a caucus state, which makes it very interesting. Caucus states choose their delegates. PCOs, who are the precinct committee officers I was talking about, this is another really important thing that they do. They hold precinct caucuses where delegates are elected by neighbors of the same party, getting together in houses or schools generally, and electing delegates to their county convention. And then at the county convention, the delegates elected at the precinct caucuses elect delegates to the state convention, and then at those state conventions, those delegates elect the national delegates who are then pledged to vote for a particular presidential candidate. That's in a caucus state. In a caucus state and a full caucus state, primary results, even though they might even have a primary, are only advisory and don't count for anything. All that counts is people showing up at the precinct caucuses, and that's it. That's how we get delegates for president in those states. And so that's a very much party-controlled process. So if you are in a caucus state, you would want to make a real effort to show up at your caucus and either be a delegate for your presidential candidate or at this point, we're asking people, there's a lot of people on the left and progressive side that want to vote for Ron Paul, and they can actually show up at Republican caucuses and sign up for the Republican Party for just this period of time and vote to get Ron Paul in as the other candidate. Obama, I think, won't be challenged in the primary. Not absolutely sure about that, but it looks like he won't be challenged. So Obama's going to be the Democratic nominee, and we would really like to see Ron Paul be our other alternative to that. But this is a bipartisan organization, so I'm going to give you, I might mention Ron Paul, but you're certainly free to vote for whoever you would like. In a primary state, of course, there's popular election, which is what a lot of people are familiar with. And at that point, in caucus states, we have a lot more control within the party about who we elect. In primary states, you're going to see it's the people with money that control the primary states. And you see a lot of big states in there that, this is where the candidates are going to be putting the really big money and using advertising, and they're going to use up lots of their campaign funds in those states. It's a lot less of a grassroots process. It's more of a media blitz process. The delegates that go to convention to vote basically for their man for president or their woman, at those conventions, the interesting thing is that through laws in the states, those conventions, the delegates at those conventions have complete political control over those conventions. If those delegates want to, they can throw out all the rules, and they are the highest power of the party at that point. They have virtually unlimited power to affect change in the party. If they want to change the structure, change the bylaws, they can vote to do that. People don't realize that, and most delegates don't even realize the power that they have. PCOs have this power at their central committee meetings. They can remake the entire party the way they would like to see it. Parties are private organizations. They have laws that empower them, but basically the laws leave all of the internal workings of the party and how it's structured and everything all up to the parties to figure out. And so when you're a PCO or a delegate, you get to vote on things like the platform of the party, but you also get to vote on the bylaws of the party, which is the internal rules which control the party. And so these are ways that by being a delegate or by being a PCO, you can have a vote in these things, and you can really have an effect on what happens. And there's really underrepresentation in the parties of the actual people, because most people have gotten so uninvolved, and also these rules and everything. There's not really a handbook out there about how to get involved in the parties. It's difficult to find out the information, and the parties would like to keep it that way. I've been working to let the grassroots and the PCOs and delegates know that they have the power. They have the power to make these changes. The system was designed by law to give the grassroots, the people, the power to control the political parties. It was put into the law because of the Tammany Hall corruption. It was a way to keep the people in charge of who was going to get elected. It's state laws. Do you know, Richard, if there's any federal laws about PCOs? I think it's all state laws. I believe it's not federal. State laws actually control the party, I believe, in each state. The Republican Party today is composed of two factions. There's the older entrenched, generally long-time incumbent congressmen and senators. They are for big government as long as it keeps up big defense spending and crony corporatism. Often called the neocons, there is nothing new about them, and I prefer to call them the old cons. They are primarily concerned with business as usual, serving the status quo in their self-interest and dishing up the same old thing. They have long since written off the country, abandoning the free market and electing officials who are primarily bought and paid for by the financial sector and corporate lobbyists. They are the backslapping good old boy variety. The solid majority of American citizens, including many in their own party, find them completely untrustworthy and untenable. Well, it is this type of Republican that has caused some to say, I will never again vote Republican until the day I die. Nixon, Ford, Dole, the Bushes, McCain, Romney, and Perry exemplify this group. Then there are the patriot, constitutionalist, liberty-oriented Republicans. They include an older core group of Goldwater Republicans, Buchanan supporters, and a host of ornery independents who will vote for Republican candidates of the principled conservative stripe. They also incorporate a new group of younger, technically savvy, freedom-espousing people who have studied history and revere the Founding Fathers' vision. And that group is exemplified really by Ron and Rand Paul. The liberty groups do not support the empire building and the rash of constitutionally questionable wars that are bankrupting the nation. Contrary to what their old detractors say, they believe in a strong defense for America, just not endless war and endless debt, which only serves to line the pocket of banksters and financiers to the detriment of the country. That's what we get. Our gold-plated tanks that shoot diamonds, they might as well for what they cost us. Common sense tells us that if we bankrupt the country, our enemies win without ever having fired a shot or militarily invaded us. The liberty constitutionalist wing is what I belong to, and we believe that a streamlined, stripped-down, limited government is the best protector of liberty. I prefer to call them patriots of the old-style Jeffersonian, Madison, Paine, Adams, Washington variety. The Tea Party is largely composed of this group, with some co-opted bleed over to the old cons. These two factions, and they're getting close to 50-50, are in a huge fight, a war right now for control of the party, and believe me, politics is war. You will see this playing out as the status quo does everything they can to destroy a Ron Paul presidency. In back rooms in counties and states all over America, the Republican Party is in a massive effort to prevent the change which would put leaders in the party to elect candidates who would favor monetary reform. There's only a few ways this can play out. The Patriot Liberty Coalition, bolstered by the Tea Party and Paul supporters, take over the party by sheer numbers. We're very close to that, which means the party is in an absolute panic. This has already happened in some places where this coalition has taken over the party, but it's failed in other areas where people were so completely disgusted with the old cons that they dropped out instead. And I have this problem in my area, trying to get people to be involved in the party. They come in, they see the corruption, and they just say, oh, I just can't stand it. I just don't want to deal with it. Well, we need to stick in there, hang in there, because political change, it can happen slowly over a period of time, and then sometimes events happen, huge events, and it can change overnight. So you have to hang in there for the long haul to see those really massive changes that can come when an idea's time is ripe, like monetary reform. We know this is an idea whose time is ripe. There could be a significant third party. Now, if this would be I mean, this would be disastrous for the Republican Party. If the Liberty Coalition part of the GOP were to split off and vote third party because they would refuse to vote for a candidate that they feel is unprincipled, and many people in the Liberty Coalition have made this pledge. They won't vote for an unprincipled Republican candidate owned by the banksters. They won't vote for them. This causes really a problem for the Republican Party because they need that part of their party to vote for their candidate in order to get any viable candidate elected. They have to have us. But if we say we won't vote for Romney, we won't vote for Perry, you know, and at that point they are really in a dilemma. And they know, because I've written about this and we've trumpeted it throughout the party, we're not going to vote for these people. They know those candidates aren't viable. They will never win with that kind of a candidate. We're trying to force them basically to elect Ron Paul, to nominate Ron Paul. We're trying to put that to them, say, look, if you don't, we're going to vote third party, and that means a dead GOP. So they're in a dilemma right now. And this stuff, you know, most people don't hear about any of this because it's all under the radar. You know, the media doesn't cover it a lot of what's going on in the internal party politics. The problem with a third party is the only way it could possibly have a chance is with a hugely charismatic and powerful leader. You would have to have somebody that was really a powerful person to pull off, you know, winning an election at a third party. But we are at a time in history where this might be a possibility at some point. People are really disgusted with the status quo. They're beginning to understand that they're being ripped off by the banks. And so we could see a paradigm shift. The GOP may become irrelevant. There may be a third party. It's possible. I mean, the third option, which I don't want to see, is that the old cons will stay in power and continue the looting and ruination of the country and currency through unpayable debt promulgated by the criminal banking syndicate. They will join with their counterparts across the aisle in the destruction of America, destroying themselves as well, because they have consciously and maniacally kept from power those that could have saved us. That's your corporate Senate. You've got the best Senate that money can pay for. And I tell people, I say, if you don't donate to campaigns and get behind the political candidates that are going to be responsive to the people and responsive about monetary reform, then you're going to have the very best government money can buy. Because if you don't donate to your congressman, someone else will buy them. Now, that was a bit about the party and how it's structured. How does this affect monetary reform? What do we need to do to get monetary reform passed in Congress? Because remember, without a political solution, there is no solution. I call it the 535 plus 1. And the 535 is, of course, the Congress and the Senate, and the President is the plus 1. I mean, in order to get legislation passed in this country, there's only one thing that matters. It's those votes and those people. I mean, this is where all your focus has to be. The good thing is that you don't need to waste a lot of time on anything else. The hard thing is that it takes a lot of grassroots participation to lobby those people successfully. When the Campaign for Liberty pushed for the Audit the Fed bill that Ron Paul sponsored through a concerted grassroots effort, we were able to get 320 co-sponsors in the House and 35 in the Senate. It is really highly unusual for a bill to get that kind of support. When you get that many, you can actually force a floor vote on your bill. I mean, if you were to get that many sponsors, you can force them to take a vote out. You can get it out of committee, because most bills die in committee. Every bill that goes out gets referred to a committee to look at it. And those committee chairs, who are generally entrenched incumbents, and generally they have, they're beholden to corporate interests, they're the ones that decide which bills get out of committee, unless you get, I believe it's a 2/3 majority of the co-signers, and the rules then allow you to force it to a vote. So when they realized this bill, when Barney Franks, who was the head of the committee, realized this bill was getting to the point where it was going to be forced to a vote, he began to take control of it and to also act like, he was on board this idea. He subsequently did a lot of things to try and derail it. And it was, Actually, it got put into another bill, and that was the Financial Stability Improvement Act. After a bunch of shenanigans to try and dilute its power. They ended up, through various things that went on between the House and the Senate, they managed to dilute it. But we did get a partial audit of the Federal Reserve out of that effort. And through that partial audit is where we were able to find out how much money went to foreign banks and the trillions of dollars that they spent, what banks it went to. And that was a huge effort to try and get that information out. Right now, that same bill has been reintroduced this session and has 182 co-sponsors in the House and 8 in the Senate. When we were trying to get co-sponsors on that bill, we took the issue directly to the legislators, educated them and their staffs about it, showed up at town hall meetings and brought it up all the time, requesting them to co-sponsor it, and we got thousands of petitions signed and delivered to their offices. And so through a working of a great deal of work and a whole crew of people working, we had people visiting and talking with Jay Inslee, who was a congressman we were trying to lobby. We had people talking to his staffers. We had left literature with the staff. Then we went to his town hall meeting. And outside his town hall meeting, we were getting petitions signed, and which we then delivered to his staffers right before the meeting was occurring. And just about every last person signed the petition. It didn't matter whether they were Republican or Democrat. All we had to say to them was, the Fed has taken trillions of your tax dollars. Don't you want to know what they did with the money? And everybody signed the petition. Everybody wanted to know, what had happened to trillions of their tax dollars. Everybody had an interest in that. It was universal. We had an entire audience of about 300 to 400 people, and we passed out Slim Jims, which were just a half sheet of paper which explained the Federal Reserve System and why it should be audited, so that everyone in the audience was pre-programmed. They knew the issue, and they most likely had already signed the petition. So we set the audience up, and then I'm going to show you the video of what happened when I asked Jay Inslee the question. Richard's going to play it for you. Didn't start at the beginning. That effort was a lot of people, I was the one that actually got to ask the question of him, and I had no idea, of course, that he was going to co-sponsor it at that point, so I was really thrilled by that. But it was a lot of people. We put in a lot of effort, and as you saw when I first asked the question, I don't know if it started right at the beginning. This is not a great video, of course. It was just somebody in the audience that took it. So, but it shows that, through a concerted lobbying effort ahead of time, when I asked the question, the whole audience, everyone cheered because they knew the issue. They had just been educated about it. They'd signed the petition. And so we got in there, and he looked around and went, wow, this is a winning issue. Everybody's on left and right. I can't make any enemies by doing this. Of course, the bankers didn't like it, but, he saw his whole constituency going, yeah, do this, And so he thought, well, this is a great political move. And so that's one way that you can lobby your legislators, through a concerted effort where you target them. And Jay Inslee's a consummate politician. He recognized that this was an issue that was a winner. In the 2010 elections, I worked on the campaigns of two men in Washington State who understood the need for monetary reform. They were Clint Didier, who ran for Senate, and John Koster, who ran for Congress. Both lost, but John Koster lost by a very, very slight margin, and he's running again, and I believe maybe this time he'll get in. I had talked to him. He understands the banking issue. He understands the American Monetary Act. He's for it. He's a really great candidate. And I'm going to be working for him again. And I talked to him for many hours about monetary reform, the need for that. And so he was really open and amenable to learning all about it. When candidates are running for office, it's a great time to engage with them, because you can make friends with them, you can do fundraisers for them, they'll listen to you because they're much more open than when they actually get to Washington. They're totally removed from your state. It's really hard to get an audience with them. But when they're running for office, if you can find good candidates, educate them ahead of time, then you're in a much better position. Once they get elected, they already know about your issue. And we need more of these people in Congress, and that's why I've been working so hard on these various campaigns. And when you find your champions, people that are going to support your efforts, your bill, you need to reward them and support them with all your might. The honest politician is a rare species, always endangered. Early in 2009, when the Tea Party was formed, I began to speak at their rallies about the Federal Reserve. I was invited to some of their groups to give talks about the economy, and I focused on the Federal Reserve and the American Monetary Institute's bill. People were very receptive to this message. Often they look just like this. When people suddenly realize what the system is doing to them, when they really they were worried about the debt issue, but they didn't understand how debt was created, they didn't understand money, and once they realize it, and it's not that hard to explain, really, they're like deer in the headlights. And they came up to me and thanked me, and they said, what can we do? And I talked about the bill and how they should be supporting that. So in order to pass a bill in Congress, you need to get it introduced, which we have done. You need to lobby that 535. That is your main job, is to lobby. If you, in every state, you need to start getting people together to put pressure on. And even if they don't really believe in your issue, they're political animals. They want to get reelected, and so you can pressure them. And if they really see enough of their constituency is behind something like this, you can sway people that, that maybe they don't really care one way or another, but they see it as a politically good issue to get behind because it's popular. And with enough co-sponsors on a bill, you can force a floor vote, which bypasses the committees, which have so much power over bills. I think electing a president who will address monetary reform, which I know that Ron Paul would. I mean, he's coming more from the Austrian School of Economics, although I know that he doesn't favor going back to a gold standard. He realizes that would not work. I would say that what would happen, Ron Paul himself, as a president, is not going to introduce legislation. That's up to the Congress, and he does understand the separation of powers, and he would not expect that he would be introducing legislation. So he would have to deal with whatever Congress decides to do. So Congress is essentially more important than the president in that regards. But I believe that he would open a dialogue and set our country up, because he would be talking about monetary and economic issues in a way that has never happened before in this country. He's going to go after the banksters. I believe there will be criminal prosecutions. I think a lot of the fraud would be addressed, and I think that this would be a positive thing for the country, open a dialogue on this issue, which could, allow a Monetary Act bill to be passed. And it would give us a chance to have a dialogue with him as well. When you have enemies on committees that will not allow your bill to come to the floor, try to dilute your bill, or try to get it bundled in with bad legislation, you have to increase the pressure of your phone calling and lobbying to try and prevent that from happening. The people that are in there are masters at manipulating the system. And so you have to, really get organized ahead of time to be ready to kind of fend off some of these things. And sometimes you can't, so you have to just work with what you can do. If certain legislators are obvious enemies of your bill, you have to work through the system to get them out and get someone else elected. Your enemies have to be targeted and gotten out of office. If you have, people that are on certain committees and they're never going to allow your bill to come out of committee ever, target that person. Get your efforts focused in their district to get them unelected, and there are many methods to do this. I mean, I could teach a whole 3-hour class on methods to get someone unelected, and in Campaign for Liberty we have classes on these things and how you do them, because there are ways to force people out of office. A lot of times these people have a lot of dirt on them. You have to find out what they're all about, look at who their contacts are. Some of these people are actually engaged in criminal activity, and they really need the light of day put on them. And but you can do things like you can call their donor list. This public information, and say, do you know you're supporting this person, and they won't do whatever it is that you want to do. They won't support monetary reform, which would be great for the country. And you could go on and explain to them how good it is for the country. And then when they get donors calling them saying, I had somebody calling me and saying that you don't support this, and I think it's a really good idea. Well, they listen to big donors. They actually do. So that's one method. I mean, the other method we do to make our grassroots armies seem bigger than they are is to go and target their home area, where their house is located in their district. You can go and leaflet all of that area heavily. And then their neighbors will call them up and say, we got this thing, in the mail. And then, his mom says, oh, son, I got this thing in the mail here. I mean, there's ways to make, there's tricks, that you can use to actually get some people moving on things, even if they're not really on your side. And they usually do put their finger to the political wind, and even Barney Franks, recognizing the audit the Fed bill was extremely popular, was willing then to let it come out of committee, and actually he was going to be forced to do it anyways, but he was willing to start acting. He was starting to act like he was on board with, which I don't think he really was, but he at least had to pretend like he was. Whenever you have a movement or an organization, you have to be a little careful about disruptors. I'm going to give you a little background on the Tea Party and its evolution. I was a speaker at the first Everett, Washington Tea Party, and also went on to the first Seattle Tea Party. At the beginning, it was composed of a mix of conservatives, independents, and some progressive Democrats. The overriding issue, the reason that almost every person showed up, was that they were concerned about the overspending in government leading to the buildup in debt. Universally, they were afraid of the consequences for their children and their country if this continued to go on. But one other group showed up, and they were the Lyndon LaRouches. And they were the ones that had the Hitler mustache Obama signs. Because of them, the media focused on that and thus began smearing the Tea Party as racist. The LaRouches set up tables at each event, and it was easy to see where the signs had originated. I went over and looked at the table and looked at their literature, and the reason they had these is they were trying to say that the health care bill was overreaching and that Hitler had used health care as a way to round up Jews. I mean, this was what they were saying in their literature, but that's what their signs were there for. But the media ignored everything about it. They never mentioned, or rarely, that it was the LaRouche people that were there doing it, and they used it to smear the entire group, and it continues to go on. And so, you sometimes, and at these rallies, these were so kind of spontaneous grassroots. They'd have some organizer who had never even done any organizing at all that just came up out of his neighborhood and said, I'm going to have a tea party, we got to do something. And so, when these people came to their meeting, they didn't immediately throw them out. They didn't really think about it, and then as it showed up in the media later on, they were being smeared, and yet they had done nothing to prevent it. They hadn't gone over and said, no, you can't have those signs here. That's really disrespectful to our president. They didn't do that, and so, they got smeared throughout the media, and it goes on to this day. The GOP immediately saw an opportunity to hijack the movement and use it for their own ends. They actually started having their own tea parties with their leaders in charge. The last Tea Party I went to in Everett, Washington, which is close to where I live, was much smaller and dominated by the Republican Party. Most of the independents and Democrats and undecideds were gone. Through divide and conquer, this movement was being derailed by being just co-opted into the Republican Party to become a part of it. And you saw that with the presidential debate where they had the Tea Party, the CNN Tea Party presidential debate. That was Dick Armey's group, the Tea Party Patriots, and it's part of the co-opted part of the Tea Party. It's owned by the Republican Party, basically, and run by it. The issues that germinated the Tea Party movement are still there, and the people concerned about them still exist. But it demonstrates how easy it is for a movement to be contaminated and co-opted when other interests come along and cause damage and usurp your message. This is indicative of how politics are played and how major powers and even minor players can co-opt a movement to their own ends. This type of thing can also be applied to monetary reform efforts in the AMI because, of course, they can be targeted in the same way. When I was in the Libertarian Party supporting Harry Browne for president, we had a meeting group called the Freedom Forum. Since we were also politically active in local elections and in outing corruption in government, the powers that be decided to cause some trouble. We had regular meetings of about 50 to 100 people. And then as it progressed, several times we had strangers come in and stand up and start spouting white supremacist or anti-Semitic nonsense and putting such literature on our tables. We had to have our sergeant-at-arms escort them out and, of course, run over and throw away all their literature. But then the next day in the newspaper it was reported that we were somehow affiliated with white supremacists, even though we'd never tolerated it, and even though we threw them out right in front of everybody. But you see, it was a setup. One of our members surprised someone in the parking lot, was busy writing down all of our license plates. I mean, I could go on. A lot of these things happen, but you get the picture of how, if ever you're having any success in outing corruption or, against the powers that be, they are going to come against you. And a smear campaign is, one of the most effective political tools that they have against you. Because if you're honest, if you're good, you're trying to do decent things, they'll just try and set it up to make you look like a bad guy, and then, the media can go along. Yes?
But you said you can also hold a 3-hour speech about the tricks.
Oh, absolutely. I could. I'm going to stop there, though. I mean, I'm going to get on to some, oops, I think they both went out. Hello? Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm going to get on to some good news, because, there's some bad news, but there's a lot of really good news about yes, let's hear the good news. Okay, the good news is that the left and the right can come together on the monetary reform issue. And so it's good if the American Monetary Institute remains bipartisan because it will take both sides to get the bill passed. So we've got to be really, clear on that, this is something that's bipartisan, favored by most Americans, and that we can get it passed, without having the two parties begin to just break up on it, because if that happens, it can be really, really difficult. In August, I was at an interfaith regional summit on economics where about 130 group leaders, mostly from progressive groups, got together to discuss the economic crisis and what to do about it. I was chosen as the Tea Party representative with another friend from Campaign for Liberty, as they were trying to promote a dialogue between progressives and conservatives. And I was on a panel there, and we met a number of breakout groups. The funny thing is that the progressives thought the conservative Tea Party types would be racist, warmongering, corporatist neocons. Instead, they found out that many of our concerns about the takeover of our government by the banksters. Can you guys hear me? Because I can talk loud. Okay.
I'll try to get this one.
Yeah, well, this one's working now again. Okay.
It's intermittent.
Instead, they found out that many of our concerns about the takeover of our government by the banksters, corporations, Wall Street, and the military-industrial complex were something that we all shared in common. In fact, we came to the conclusion that until we addressed that situation, the things we might disagree on were of little importance in comparison. Many of the people came up to me and said they were very disillusioned with Obama, who had promised much and delivered little on his promises. They told me they were leaning towards supporting Ron Paul even if they did not agree with him on everything, because they believed that he at least would follow through on his promises to end the war and address the economic issues. We also all agreed that there's a concerted effort by the powers that be to keep the left and the right apart, keeping them arguing about divisive social issues so that they do not address the greatest injustice of all, the method whereby the financial elite steals from the less financially astute. And so I say, I can break these manacles, and we can do it. We can break the manacles. We can get the criminal syndicate out of our government. We just need to band together to do it. So I'll take questions.